For decades, if you looked up at the night sky over the California desert and saw something that looked like a giant black boomerang slicing through the stars without a sound, chances are you weren't seeing a UFO. You were seeing the ghost of Jack Northrop's dream finally come to life. He designed planes that didn't need tails or fuselages, just pure wings carrying everything inside. They were invisible to radar before radar even knew what to look for. He built the future of stealth bombing, but the government crushed his vision first, then brought it back decades later when the world finally caught up. John Knudsen Northrop, everyone called him Jack, wasn't born into money or privilege. He came into the world on November 10, 1895, in Newark, New Jersey. His family moved around, eventually landing in Santa Barbara, California, where the Pacific breeze carried the promise of flight. As a teenager, Jack watched a pilot assemble a homemade aircraft right on a neighbor's lawn. That moment hooked him. No fancy degree, no silver spoon, just raw mechanical talent from working in his father's construction business, fixing cars in garages, and sketching as an architectural draftsman. He learned stress analysis the hard way, on paper and in the real world. In 1916, at 20 years old, Jack walked into the Loghead Aircraft Manufacturing Company, the early version of what would become Lockheed. He started as a draftsman, drawing seaplanes and biplanes. When World War I broke out, the Army drafted him, but his skills got him transferred to the Signal Corps, where he kept working on aviation. After the war, Loghead shut down in 1920 due to the post-war aircraft glut. Jack bounced back to his father's construction work for a couple of years, but aviation wouldn't let him go. By 1923, he joined Douglas Aircraft Company.
There he helped design the Douglas World Cruiser, the planes that made the first round-the-world flight. He rose fast to project engineer, proving he could turn ideas into metal that actually flew. But Jack had bigger dreams. He believed the perfect airplane had no drag from tails or fuselages. Everything, crew, engines, bombs, belonged inside the wing itself. A flying wing. Pure efficiency. Critics laughed. The establishment said it was impossible to control. In 1927, Jack rejoined the Loghead brothers, now spelling it Lockheed, at their new company. As chief engineer, he designed the Lockheed Vega. Sleek, wooden monocoque fuselage, cantilever wings. It was a game changer. Amelia Earhart flew one across the Atlantic. Wiley Post used it for records. The Vega made Lockheed famous, but Jack grew frustrated. The company wouldn't back his all-metal flying wing ideas. So in 1929, he walked out and founded his own firm, Avion Corporation. There he built his first true step toward the flying wing, an all-metal monoplane with a pilot and engine buried inside the wing. It had tail booms at first, but the vision was clear. Avion got bought out in 1930 by United Aircraft. Jack tried again in 1932, founding Northrop Corporation in El Segundo, backed by his old friend Donald Douglas. He produced legends, the Alpha, Gamma, Delta, fast all-metal monoplanes that pushed performance limits. During the Great Depression, the company struggled, but Jack kept innovating. By 1939, when Northrop became a Douglas subsidiary, he started fresh again, an independent Northrop in Hawthorne, California. World War II turned Northrop into a powerhouse. His P-61 Black Widow became America's first dedicated night fighter, over 700 built, deadly in every theater. The company delivered more than 1,000 aircraft to the Allies. But Jack's real passion stayed hidden: the flying wing. He built small test models, the N-1M in 1940,
the N9M scale versions, proving the concept could fly stable and efficient. The government noticed. In 1941, with war clouds gathering, the Army Air Forces wanted a long-range bomber that could carry 10,000 pounds of bombs 10,000 miles round trip. They gave contracts to Northrop and Consolidated Vultee. Jack's answer? The XB-35, a massive flying wing bomber with a wingspan of 172 feet. No tail, no fuselage, just a thick wing carrying crew, engines, and bombs. It looked like something from tomorrow. Critics called it a monstrosity. Engineers said it would never be stable. But Jack knew better. He had been dreaming this for 20 years. Do you think true innovation always gets crushed by bureaucracy first? Or does it just take time to prove the visionaries right? The XB-35 flying wing bomber looked like nothing the world had ever seen. A 172-foot wingspan, 4 piston engines buried deep inside the wing, crew of 9 riding in a cockpit bubble right at the center, no vertical tail, no fuselage dragging through the air. Jack Northrop promised it would fly farther, faster, and carry more bombs than any conventional bomber. The Army Air Forces signed the contract in 1941. They wanted it flying by 1944. Jack delivered the first prototype on June 23, 1946, right on time, despite wartime shortages and constant design changes. The first flight was magic. Test pilot Max Constant eased the giant wing into the air from Hawthorne. It climbed smoothly, turned gracefully, and landed without drama. The press called it revolutionary. Air Force generals were stunned. Here was a bomber that could reach Berlin from New York without refueling, drop its load, and return. The range was insane, over 10,000 miles. The drag was cut in half compared to conventional designs. Fuel efficiency soared.
Jack had proven his 20-year obsession wasn't fantasy. But problems appeared fast. The flying wing was a handful to fly. Without a tail, it wanted to Dutch roll, a slow, sickening oscillation that made pilots seasick. The engines vibrated. The propellers caused torque that twisted the wing. Engineers added small vertical fins on the trailing edge. They installed dampers. They changed control surfaces. Jack fought every change. He believed the pure wing was the answer. The fixes were band-aids on genius. Then came the jet age. In 1947, the Air Force said forget pistons, make it a jet bomber. Jack redesigned the XB-35 into the YB-49, same wing, but 8 Allison jet engines buried in the leading edge. The YB-49 flew in October 1947. It was faster. It was quieter. It looked even more alien. Pilots reported the same handling quirks, but the performance was breathtaking. One YB-49 flew from Muroc Dry Lake to right field in 4 hours flat, a record that stood for years. The competition hated it. Convair had the B-36, a massive conventional bomber with 6 piston engines and 4 jets. It was ugly, slow to build, but it was proven. Northrop's flying wing was radical. Radical meant risk. Radical meant expensive fixes. The Air Force brass started whispering. Jack's enemies grew. Some said he was stubborn. Others said he was arrogant. He refused to compromise the basic design. He told generals the problems were solvable with time and money. They wanted certainty now. In 1949, the axe fell. The Air Force canceled the YB-49 program. They ordered all prototypes scrapped. Jack watched as crews cut up his beautiful wings with torches. One airframe survived briefly as a static test article. Then it too was destroyed. The official reason? Cost overruns and handling issues. The real reason, many believed, was politics. Northrop had no friends in high places. Convair had deep connections in Washington. Jack never forgave the betrayal. He walked away from the wreckage a broken man.
The company he built nearly collapsed. He retired in 1955, bitter and disillusioned. He told friends the flying wing was dead, killed not by physics, but by men who feared change. For 30 years, the dream lay buried. The Air Force moved on to B-47s, B-52s, B-58s. All conventional designs with tails and fuselages. But Jack's ideas refused to die. In the early 1970s, radar became the new enemy. Soviet air defenses improved. Surface-to-air missiles grew smarter. High-altitude bombers were no longer safe. Speed alone wasn't enough. The Pentagon needed something invisible. They needed low observable technology, stealth. A small group of engineers at Lockheed Skunk Works started the HEV Blue program. They built tiny test shapes with sharp angles and radar-absorbing materials. The shapes looked familiar. They looked like scaled-down flying wings. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency funded studies. One study after another came back to the same conclusion. The most efficient stealth shape was a flying wing. Do you believe the government sometimes buries genius only to resurrect it when desperation forces their hand? The wheel had turned. The same man who scrapped Jack's dream now needed it desperately, and they knew exactly who had the blueprints. The resurrection began in secret rooms far from the public eye. In the early 1970s, the United States faced a nightmare. Soviet radar networks blanketing Eastern Europe. Advanced surface-to-air missiles that could reach bombers at 60,000 feet. And fighter interceptors that could chase anything slower than Mach 3. The B-52 Stratofortress, America's workhorse, was becoming a sitting duck. Speed had been the answer once. Altitude had been the answer once. Now the answer had to be invisibility. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency quietly funded a classified program called Tacit Blue. They needed proof that a low observable aircraft could actually work. Lockheed's Skunk Works produced the HAV Blue demonstrator, a small, faceted diamond shape that looked like a stealth fighter. But when the Air Force asked for the next step, a real strategic bomber, the engineers kept coming back to one shape that minimized radar return better than any other: the flying wing. Jack Northrop had been dead for years. He passed away on February 17, 1981, at the age of 85, still believing his greatest creation had been murdered by short-sighted politicians. But his blueprints, wind tunnel data, and philosophy lived on in the minds of the men who had worked for him. Northrop Corporation, now Northrop Grumman after mergers, still had the institutional memory. When the Advanced Technology Bomber program launched in 1979, the company threw everything into it. The competition was brutal. Lockheed proposed a faceted design similar to HAV Blue. Boeing offered a more conventional blended wing body. Northrop went all in on the pure flying wing, just like Jack always wanted. They called it the B-2. The Air Force selected Northrop's design in 1981. The reason was simple: lowest radar cross-section, best aerodynamic efficiency, longest range. The flying wing had won, 30 years after the government scrapped it. Building the B-2 was hell. The aircraft had to be made almost entirely of composites, carbon fiber, graphite epoxy, materials barely understood in the 1980s. Every surface had to be precisely curved to scatter radar waves. The leading edges had serrated sawtooth patterns. The exhaust was buried and cooled to hide heat signatures. Even the paint was special. Radar-absorbent material that weighed tons but made the plane nearly invisible to radar. The wingspan reached 172 feet, exactly the same as the old XB-35. Coincidence? Hardly. The basic proportions were Jack's. The crew compartment sat in the center, just like before. The engines, 4 General Electric F-118 turbofans, were buried inside.
their intakes and exhausts shaped to minimize radar reflection. The B-2 could carry 40,000 pounds of bombs, conventional or nuclear, and fly more than 6,000 nautical miles without refueling. With one aerial refueling, it could strike anywhere on Earth. But the cost was astronomical. Each aircraft ran over $2 billion in 1990s dollars. Congress balked. They cut the order from 132 to just 21. Critics called it a boondoggle. Supporters called it priceless. The first flight came on July 17, 1989, from Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale, California, the same airfield where Jack had tested his YB-49 decades earlier. Test pilot Bruce Hines eased the Black Ghost into the sky. It flew perfectly. No Dutch roll, no instability. Fly-by-wire computers and advanced controls had solved the problems that doomed the YB-49. The public first saw the B-2 on November 22, 1988, when it rolled out of the hangar under tight security. The world gasped. It looked like a giant bat, or a UFO, or exactly what Jack Northrop had envisioned in the 1930s. Do you think it's poetic justice that the same shape the Air Force once called impossible became the most expensive aircraft ever built? The B-2 Spirit entered service in 1997. It flew combat missions over Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, always undetected, always untouchable. Pilots called it the ultimate weapon. Enemies never even knew it was coming until the bombs fell. Jack Northrop never lived to see it. But if he had stood on that Palmdale ramp in 1989, watching his dream lift off in black titanium and composite, he might have allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The flying wing wasn't dead. It had just been waiting for the world to need it again. The B-2 Spirit didn't just fly, it disappeared. On its first combat deployment in 1999 during Operation Allied Force over Kosovo, the world never saw it coming. 21 aircraft delivered the majority of precision-guided munitions against Serbian targets. Serbian air defenses, some of the best in Europe at the time, fired hundreds of missiles. Not one locked on. Not one hit. The B-2s dropped their bombs from above 40,000 feet, turned around, and vanished back across the Atlantic to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. A single mission could last over 30 hours, with multiple aerial refuelings. Pilots called it the longest bomber missions in history. The stealth was total. The radar cross-section was rumored to be smaller than a hummingbird. Engineers achieved this through obsessive detail. Every rivet flush, every antenna recessed, every edge angled to deflect radar waves away from the source. The flying wing shape helped tremendously. No vertical surfaces to bounce signals back. No tail to create corners. The entire aircraft acted like one giant deflector. Jack Northrop had intuited this advantage decades before radar was a weapon. But the price tag haunted the program. Each B-2 cost more than $2 billion. The most expensive aircraft ever built, adjusted for inflation. Congress slashed the original plan of 132 bombers down to 21 production aircraft, plus one test airframe. Critics in Washington screamed waste. Supporters pointed to the results. One B-2 could do the work of dozens of conventional bombers, with far less risk to pilots and far greater accuracy. In the end, the 21 birds proved their worth time and again. In 2001, after the September 11th attacks, the B-2s flew non-stop from Missouri to Afghanistan, a round trip of over 30 hours, dropping satellite-guided bombs on Taliban positions. In 2003, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, they opened the air campaign by hitting leadership bunkers in Baghdad with precision strikes. In 2011, they flew from the United States to Libya, dropped their payload,
and returned home the same day. No other bomber could match that reach, that stealth, that endurance. The aircraft's mystique grew. Pilots wore special suits to reduce infrared signature. The black coating absorbed radar and heat. Maintenance crews spent hours polishing surfaces to keep them perfect. A single fingerprint could increase detectability. The Spirit became the most maintained aircraft in the Air Force inventory. Yet every pilot who flew it said the same thing. Once you strap in, you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. You become invisible, untouchable, a ghost in the sky. Jack Northrop's original vision had been efficiency first: range, payload, fuel savings. The YB-49 promised the same advantages in the 1940s. The Air Force rejected it then because the technology to tame the handling wasn't ready. Computers were room-sized. Fly-by-wire was science fiction. By the 1980s, digital flight controls solved the stability issues. Advanced materials made the structure light and strong. Radar made stealth essential. The pieces finally aligned. Northrop Grumman engineers openly acknowledged the debt. During design reviews, they pulled out old wind tunnel models of the XB-35 and YB-49. They compared data. The basic aerodynamic shape survived almost unchanged. The wing sweep, the airfoil thickness, the control surface placement. Jack's fingerprints were everywhere. One lead designer said publicly, "We stood on the shoulders of a giant who was 50 years ahead of his time." Do you think history's greatest vindications come when the world finally needs what it once rejected? The B-2 proved Jack right in the most dramatic way possible. But even as it soared, another chapter was unfolding. One that would bring the flying wing full circle back to the man who dreamed it first. Jack Northrop lived long enough to see the first whispers of his vindication, but not the full triumph. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, as stealth technology emerged from black programs, rumors reached him in his quiet home in California. Friends and former engineers visited, bringing stories of strange new shapes being tested in the Nevada desert. They spoke in hushed tones about faceted aircraft, radar-absorbing paints, and above all, the return of the flying wing concept. Jack, by then in his 80s, listened with a mix of pride and quiet bitterness. He never said much, but those who knew him saw the spark return to his eyes. He died on February 17, 1981, just as the Advanced Technology Bomber program was gaining momentum. He never saw the B-2 roll out. He never heard the roar of its engines or watched it lift silently into the sky. Yet in a very real sense, he was there. Every line of the Spirit carried his DNA. The wingspan matched his XB-35 exactly. The internal bomb bays echoed his original layout. The philosophy of burying engines, crew, and weapons inside a single lifting surface. That was pure Jack Northrop, conceived when most engineers still argued over biplanes versus monoplanes. After his death, the company honored him quietly. Northrop Grumman kept his name alive in hallways and design rooms. When the B-2 entered service, the first public rollout included a small tribute. A photograph of Jack standing beside the YB-49 placed near the entrance to the hangar. Pilots and engineers paused there before missions. It became a quiet ritual, a reminder that the aircraft they flew was not born yesterday. It was the resurrection of a dream that had been buried for 35 years. The flying wing's return changed aviation forever. After the B-2 proved the concept in combat, designers everywhere began rethinking the traditional tube and wing shape. Boeing explored blended wing bodies for future airliners. NASA tested scaled flying wings for fuel efficiency. Even the Air Force's next bomber, the B-21 Raider, openly draws from the same lineage. Unveiled in 2022, The B-21 looks like a smaller, sleeker cousin of the B-2. Its wingspan is classified, but the shape is unmistakable. Jack's Ghost flies again, this time with even greater stealth, longer range, and the promise of unmanned variants. Critics of the B-2 program eventually fell silent as the aircraft racked up mission after mission with zero combat losses. In 2019, the Air Force announced plans to keep the B-2 flying into the 2040s, longer than the B-52 it was meant to replace. The Spirit became a bridge between eras, the last of the Cold War superweapons and the first of the truly invisible strike platforms. Its 21 airframes have flown more combat hours than any other stealth aircraft. Each one is a monument to persistence. Jack Northrop's story is not just about airplanes. It's about what happens when one man sees a future others refuse to imagine. He fought the establishment for decades. He lost fortunes, companies, and nearly his sanity. Yet he never stopped believing the flying wing was the right answer. When the world finally needed it, when missiles, radar, and politics made conventional bombers obsolete, the answer was waiting in dusty files and old wind tunnel models.
Do you think every true pioneer pays the price of being too early? Or is the real tragedy not being believed when you are right? The B-2 Spirit proved Jack right in bloodless, thunderous fashion. Bombs fell without warning. Enemies never saw the hand that struck them. And somewhere, in the quiet of the California desert where it all began, the shape Jack dreamed of still cuts through the night sky. Silent, unstoppable, eternal. Jack Northrop's life reads like a cautionary tale wrapped in triumph. A man who saw the future clearly when everyone else stared at the past. He built companies, lost them, built them again. He designed over 40 aircraft types, from wooden mail planes to the deadliest night fighter of World War II. Yet history remembers him for the one idea he refused to abandon: the flying wing. That single obsession cost him contracts, friends, and peace of mind. But it also gave the world the B-2 Spirit, the aircraft that redefined what a bomber could be. Today, if you stand on the flight line at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, you might catch a glimpse of the B-2 slipping out of its hangar at dusk. The black silhouette blends into the twilight. No sound, no contrails. Just a massive wing lifting silently into the sky, heading toward some distant target the public will never hear about. 21 of these ghosts remain in service. Each one carries the weight of Jack's vision and the scars of the battles he fought to make it real. The flying wing didn't win because it was pretty. It won because physics doesn't care about politics or egos. A tailless design cuts drag. It saves fuel. It carries more payload farther. Jack knew this in the 1930s. The Air Force forgot it in the 1940s. They remembered it in the 1980s when the Cold War demanded something the enemy couldn't see. The B-2 proved Jack correct in the most expensive classroom possible. His legacy echoes beyond the bomber. The B-21 Raider, the next-generation stealth bomber, carries the same DNA. Northrop Grumman openly credits the original flying wing research. Modern drone designers study the YB-49 stability solutions. Even commercial aviation toys with blended wing concepts for fuel savings and lower emissions. Jack's idea, once called a monstrosity, now points the way forward. He once said, "We don't make mistakes, we just have unanticipated learning experiences." He lived that truth. Every cancellation, every scrapped prototype, every skeptical general was just another lesson. He never stopped learning. He never stopped pushing. When the world finally caught up,
His design didn't need reinvention. It just needed resurrection. If you ever visit the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, you can see a piece of the story. They display a restored N9M flying wing, one of Jack's small test models from the 1940s. It's tiny compared to the B-2, but the shape is identical. Stand under it. Feel the smooth curve of the wing. Imagine what it took for one man to believe in that shape when everyone else said no. Jack Northrop didn't just build airplanes. He built a philosophy. Question the conventional. Trust the data. Fight for what works. He paid the price for being ahead of his time. But in the end, time caught up, and it brought his dream back stronger, faster, and invisible. The next time you look up and see nothing but stars, remember, sometimes the most powerful things are the ones you can't see coming. Jack Northrop made that possible. A poor kid from New Jersey who drew wings on napkins and refused to quit. He didn't live to see the B-2 fly. But every time one takes off, every time a target disappears in a flash without warning, Jack Northrop is still winning. Be bold, be stubborn, be right, even if it takes 50 years. Thank you for joining this story of genius, betrayal, and ultimate redemption.